Okay, last study we will cover here on strength training biomechanics is not really a biomechanics study, but it makes an important point that I think is important to consider when you're reading biomechanics studies or training studies as they relate to performance in sports outside of sports that are predicated on lifting weights like Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting and things like that. Those are serious, legitimate sports. There's nothing. I don't mean to sound like I'm dismissive or critical of those sports. Those are real sports. But many training study, strength training studies in the literature are strength training studies on athletes in other sports where the performance outcome or metric in the sport is not the moving of weight itself, where the strength training is instead used as a means of training for some other outcome in some other sport. A common one here is sprint running performance. Athletes that are either sprinters as a dedicated type of athlete in like track and field sprinting, or athletes whose performance in their sport is greatly affected by sprinting performance and maximum speed and acceleration and things like that. So a lot of field sport athletes like American football and association football and sports like that where speed or top speed is and acceleration and things like that is important, along with of course sprinting as a sport. On its own. And I don't have a whole lot to cover here on this one. It's just a quick and fairly simple point that I wanted to highlight, and kind of related to the previous study where it was a surprising result that I was not expecting and was skeptical of. This study might also be, or this conclusion here might also be a surprising result. Long and short of it is here they reviewed and kind of combined together and summarized an overall result from a lot of different studies on training to increase your maximal strength of your lower body, your leg muscles, with movements like squats, for example, and the effect of of increasing strength, or that dimension of strength, on performance in sprinting. Now, you might intuitively think that, well, yeah, you get stronger, you make your legs stronger, you're going to sprint faster, right? There's been we saw the study way back in the jumping section on class on strength training and jumping performance, and we saw there that strength alone was not enough to make you necessarily jump higher, right? To be able to actually jump higher after a strength training intervention, it required also technique practice and changes in your technique to learn to take advantage of the new strength so that you could use it to jump higher. So independent of the actual increase in the muscular strength, required some training and some practice to use the muscular strength to actually achieve that goal of jumping higher. Scrolling down through the paper here, and here they summarize a lot of different results in a lot of different studies. It can be a little bit confusing because for over here on the far right they show the percent change in performance, and there's a lot of abbreviations and stuff. It can be a little hard to follow. But here, for example, they looked at strength in your 1 rep max, and they had 2 different training groups in this first study, and this one increased their squat 1 rep max by 12%, and this one by 11%. So you see that in most of these studies that are summarized here, where the training intervention was quite successful in increasing strength. And you'll see, pretty substantial, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 plus percent increases in strength of movements like squats here from these interventions. So they're all very successful, or mostly very successful, in increasing the actual strength of the squat motion or whatever motion they were testing here. But then they saw fairly inconsistent results of that increase in strength on the sprinting performance. And here's where things can get a little bit confusing. Like you look here and you say, oh, this group had a 12% increase in strength, but then a 4% decrease in acceleration and a 2% decrease in speed on like a 20-meter dash. Most of these studies were either looking at the speed, like the top speed they were able to attain, or in some cases they were looking at the time that it took them to cover that distance. So in this case, it says speed over here. It's not actually speed, so their speed didn't decrease by 4%. What decreased was by 4% was the time that they needed to cover that distance. So that's actually an improvement, right? It's a 4% improvement, even though there's a negative sign on it here. So that's a little bit inconsistent in this study. Sometimes they don't do a real great job here of distinguishing between cases where it always kind of labels its speed, but sometimes the variable they were looking at was actually time. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you're looking at here. It's one of those cases where to really get the clear picture of what was the actual take-home message here, you unfortunately actually have to read the whole study and the full text to get that. It's not entirely clear from this summary table here. The big take-home message here, though, if I scroll down to the end here, where they give some conclusions that I have highlighted here, says the bulk of the literature has found significant strength gains without significant improvements in speed. And they go down here and give like a summary of kind of all these studies combined here. And they say for recreational trained athletes, it would seem that a 23% increase in squat run rep max is necessary for an improvement in sprinting times of about 2%. So let's suppose you're starting at baseline with a 1 rep max squat of 200 pounds and you increase that up to like 250 pounds. That's a pretty dramatic increase in squat strength, especially over like the durations of training that they typically cover in studies like this, which are typically something like 8 weeks or so. For somebody that's already starting at a pretty modestly trained baseline like that, adding that much strength is a pretty large increase in strength. And out of that, you only get like a 2% improvement in your performance for your sports outcome there. Now, we saw in the studies early on like running economy, like 1%, 2%, 3% differences in sports like this, like that can be a pretty big deal. Like you tell any sprint athlete, hey, you can do this training thing and you'll get 2% faster. They're going to want that. Like it's 2% is 2%, right? But if you increase this one thing by 23%, 2% there seems like, that's kind of might be in like the diminishing returns region there. I'm not really getting a gigantic boost in performance for that gigantic increase in strength. And there are even some studies here where they added quite a bit of strength to the athletes and then saw no significant or no meaningful increase in strength. So this is an important thing to keep in mind, to tie back in with the study some time ago on the jumping, where it wasn't just enough to jump appreciably higher. It wasn't just enough to get stronger. You also had to practice the mechanics of the jumping and work on the technique of the jumping to get higher. And probably the same thing I think is true here in sprinting. Sprinting is a very, very technical sport. Say a good like sprinting coach, like a professional track and field coach at the college level, at the professional level, could very easily watch somebody like me, reasonably fit, but untrained, not well coached, somebody like that sprinting. You could watch somebody like me sprint and immediately point out numerous technique flaws that I could change that would immediately make me faster. Right now, would I have the strength and the power and the flexibility to make those changes? Maybe, maybe not. And that's where the training comes in, and the cross training in the gym and things like that. But if I was able to make those changes mechanically, I would immediately get faster. That's definitely very possible in sprinting. It's definitely possible to get 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever increases in sprinting speed without any increase in strength. So, purely through adjustments in the technique that you use to do the sprinting motion. And so adding strength is often not enough in these highly technical sports like this to achieve a significant boost in performance. Adding the strength can give you the capacity for faster speed, but actually taking advantage of that capacity and achieving that faster speed in reality requires the biomechanics, requires the adjustments to the technique to take advantage of that strength. It's the story for jumping, and based on a result like this, I think it's also the story for sprinting. Okay, that is all here. I think I mentioned that this was the last study on sprinting, and if you look on the list, last study on strength training. If you look on the list, there's one more study. There used to be a section in this class that I called comparative biomechanics to end the class with, and it was just kind of a quirky, fun section on animal athletes, like impressive athletes in the animal kingdom, in comparison to human athletes. And so how good of athletes are humans in comparison to other great athletes and that can do certain things like fast runners or fast sprinters or whatever in the animal kingdom. To add in this new strength training section that I've done this semester, something had to go, and so that's the part that I took out. But I did retain one of the studies there that I really liked to wrap up this strength training section, which is a study on the strength of great apes in comparison to humans. So humans in comparison to our closest genetic relatives in the animal kingdom, how does our strength compare? Gorillas are, of course, just on a whole different level of strength compared to humans, but they're also like 400, 500 pounds of nothing but muscle. They're just astronomically strong compared to humans. They got a lot more muscle than a human. Chimpanzees, though, are much more similar to humans in overall body size, but are much, much stronger than a human. So even, pound for pound, a chimpanzee is considerably stronger than your average human. And so why is that exactly? Where does that extra strength come from in those chimpanzees and our close genetic relatives there in the animal kingdom? And is there anything we can learn from that about human strength training and human strength and conditioning? So that's the study in the next and final video there, just to kind of close things off here.